All right, and we are live. Porpoiseful? Yeah, what happened? You just flatlined.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah, you're back now.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah, what the heck
yeah.
happened?
Yeah. Speaking of the Jewish question.
Oh my God.
uh,
Christ.
okay. So it looks like we're still rolling. Did you at least fill some time for us while I was being fucking JIDF'd?
Nope. I just muted myself and waited and messaged you on Discord because I wasn't sure what the heck happened.
Oh my god, are we even still streaming?
Yeah, we're still live.
Okay, well fuck it. Let's fucking do it, man. They're not gonna hold us back, right?
Nope, they're not.
That was man,
Christ.
that was spoopy. So yeah, where do you want to start?
Okay, well, we could start out. I suppose it's where in Hitler's life do you want to start? Because I think he really started to think about the Jews
Jewish
during his
question, yeah. When he went to Vienna, I would say.
during his years in Vienna when he came across the some of the various either pan-German parties vying for power in Austria, where he believed that German interests were being pushed out. Which I think in a certain sense that was true because it was in the years following the separation of Germany as a state and Austria as a state under Bismarck during their unification. So a lot of Germans were just either no longer caring about politics, going to Germany, for the de facto German state, and just German interests sort of falling by the wayside since there was now a German state with Teutonic peoples and an Austrian state where a lot of pan-Slavic nationalists and people like that, where it's like things were sort of starting to balkanize in the years leading up to World War I.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what led a lot of people to what was left of the German peoples in Austria, especially in Vienna. And again, this is all theory because I don't have any hard stuff right now. But it's just my thoughts that when the group was getting smaller and smaller, more and more groups became more and more radical, and that's where you start getting things like the Volkisch movement and stuff like that. And you were getting that in Germany too. But and a lot of the Catholic socialist parties, like the ones that still exist, the ones that still exist in Germany today, were sort of Hitler's first forays into political circles, and many of many of them that were not, governed by the world press, which was pretty much synonymous with Jews later on, sort of became highly anti-Semitic. There were a couple of notable politicians. Let me look them up for you real quick. I'll put them up on the screen if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm pretty sure I put that on my favorites at some point.
One of I read this book first about a decade ago.
Mm-hmm.
I found unironically, I found a copy of it, PDF form, or I think, or something like that on 4chan.
Mm-hmm.
Go figure, right? Read it. I mean, it didn't really I don't say blow my mind or anything, but unbiasedly, Hitler is actually really, really smart.
Oh, go figure. He was able to bring the entire country under his thumb.
Yeah.
By just being a really good spokesperson.
Oh, no, not even that. Like, he was a keen observationalist. He's a pretty decent historian. And
hold on, I need to mute myself real quick.
People say,
hold on, I need to mute myself.
Well, I'm not going to hold on for you. I didn't hold on for the JIDF trying to shut my stream down. I'm not going to hold on for you. Yeah, he muted himself. So, as a lot of people know, Hitler was a failed artist or whatever. And one of the more ironic things that I remember from Mein Kampf is that when he's doing his in the earlier book, when he's doing more or less like his growing up and pre-war and stuff like that, he went to Vienna so that he could go to school to be an artist. And his father before wanted him to go and be wanted him to work in I can't remember exactly, some kind of political office. He wanted him to be like a statesman, more or less, I guess. And he didn't want to do that because he had no interest in politics, unironically.
Yeah,
and
his father wanted him to be a civil servant.
Civil servant, yes, thank you. So his father wanted him to be a civil servant, and Hitler was kind of rebellious, and he was like, no, I'm not going to go do what my father wants to do. I want to go be an artist. I like drawing. I think I'm a good artist. My friends call me a good artist or whatever. So they have their little, classic back and forth between dad and son, and he ends up going to Vienna, and he gets into the, I don't know the name of the school, but he gets into the Academy for Art, and basically bombs. Right. And
more or less, although I found his statements about art and his fascination with architecture, it honestly made me kind of sad.
Well, that's a little bit, yeah. Well, because you never want to see like people just get their dreams crushed, right?
Yeah,
but the ironic twist was
up into the night and all that stuff. Is like it was crazy how obsessed he was with just artwork and capturing buildings and artwork and designing buildings.
Mm-hmm.
He would read books like all the way through the night, and it makes me kind of sad that just the way that he became radicalized, sort of swept up in this particular guy was an influence here. I'll put it up on the screen for you.
I find the ironic twist is that he went to the academy so that he could pass the test and get in so he could learn and graduate and do art and stuff, but he failed all that. And when he failed, the guy basically told him, like, you should have went to school for architecture. So I find it personally a bit ironic that Adolf Hitler, the guy who like grew Germany like fucking like 100-fold, right, over the course of just like years, didn't want to have anything to do with architecture or politics.
Well, he did want to. I know in the edition that I read, he was fascinated with architecture, and he liked the artistic aspect of architectural design. Right. He didn't want to be a civil servant or into arranging and settling things concerning public infrastructure. Although later on he became very big on that.
He just wasn't. He didn't go to the academy to go into architecture. He went in to go into art.
Yeah, just and some of the pieces he produces, like, you know, they're not good, but they're you know, they're not bad either. They're fairly typical for the time, you know, just modernist painting, sort of, you know, not necessarily minimalism, but, you know, it's like some of the stuff where it's like it's not ultra detailed, but it's all just sort of washed out and it's all just dabs and stuff like that. It's like you know, happy trees type thing. But
Well, it's pretty basic art.
yeah, it's just, you know, it's nothing significant. But, you know, nothing that I would kick him out of an art academy for. But so anyway, one of the guys who influenced Hitler in Vienna was this guy who I'm showing on the screen share here, is George Ritter von Schroner, which he was an example of you know, of you know, opposing political Catholicism and being an anti-Semite, which that's sort of in the line of German Protestantism in general. You know, if you've read anything by Martin Luther, you'll see things like, you know, the Jews and their lies and all that stuff. So fairly typical for a pan-German at that point. But
another thing a lot of people don't realize is that National Socialism was kind of a thing, and by kind of I mean like was actually a thing like before Hitler.
Well, yeah, it was a movement. It was a movement before Hitler got involved. It really took off when Hitler got involved, though. You had people
he was a great orator.
Exactly. He gives fantastic speeches. They still stir, you know, even though you know what he's preaching is just utter
hella passionate, like
exactly
insanely passionate.
You know, that and Germanic languages have a thing for being really good at producing speeches. Just the way you can get things to flow very easily. You know, a lot of words aren't ridiculously long, as opposed to some of the Romance languages, at least in my experience with French and Spanish. But when I took a look at some of the stuff, you see, at least in the origins of the party, you see a lot of the guys like Otto von Strasser and all of that stuff, who was also an anti-Semite, although he grew to be more anti-Semitic as time went on, thanks in no small part to Hitler's involvement. But he saw the Jews as sort of you know, more so than Hitler even, as a reflection of bourgeois interests. So it was an almost Marxist position. Instead of it being, you know, the bourgeois, it was just Jews, but they're synonymous, much like in Hitler's view. Although Hitler impresses more of a national outside identity to the Jews. So it's like, you know, they're not German, they're Jews or something like that. But it was definitely in these early years where you start seeing, you know, he was still in favor of democracy, of the democratic process for a short amount of time, but he grew very distrustful of the world press, and seeing that many of them were run by Jews, and thanks in no small part to various anti-Semitic magazines that were run by, you know, again, various Christian socialist parties. These are non-Marxist parties. These are the old kind of utopian socialists that you saw a lot during the early 19th century. A lot of them were rather anti-Semitic. So it's like, you know, parties that grew sort of out of the French socialist movement. So you see Louis Blanc and all that stuff. You know, who was responsible for trying to set up the social workshops after one of the various French revolutions. So a lot of these circles started to adapt a sort of anti-Semitic stance due to you know, the effects of German Protestantism and the general, what I'd like to call, identity politics of the time, because everyone's just fighting for a greater share of the parliament in in Austria and in parts of Germany, especially as representation was growing a great deal in these countries. Well, that's generally all I have to say about Hitler's younger years, and where he sort of got radicalized, or made into a more reactionary person instead of someone who was, by his own admission, a very classically liberal person upon his arrival in Vienna.
That's. I'm echoing. Is that you? Are you making me echo? Nope. Okay, it's gone.
No. I have my headphones on.
Okay. I got the impression that, I mean, he was young, right? And I can correlate that to when I was young, and I was a different person than I am now. And I think most people, when they grow up, that look back on them when they themselves, like when they were younger, they kind of feel the same way. Like, you know, I was a different person then than I am now. I've seen a lot of things. I've experienced a lot of things. I've changed my mind on a lot of things. And I think young Hitler, he seemed just kind of stereotypical to me. Like,
yeah, he was not an uncommon sight in you know, sort of the lower to middle bourgeoisie of the time. You know, pardon my use of Marxist rhetoric, but he was fairly typical of a man his age at the time. And moving to Vienna was something that a lot of young men were starting to do, especially as the agricultural state of Austria was in decline in favor of industry.
And that was another thing that affected him, like, really heavily. And it's kind of hard for us to put ourselves in that position because, I mean, I don't know about you, can't speak for you, but I didn't really come from a culture or a background that, like, I don't know, farmed on a regular, you know what I mean? To like for sustainability and stuff like that. You know, nobody in my family is like a cobbler and had to trade like shoes for pants, anything like that. So, I mean, it's a different time, different society. And I can imagine like the cultural shock between the transition periods, because these are two totally different like eras we're talking about, right? And I feel like that definitely played something, you know what I mean, into his mindset, because he brings that up a lot in the book, is you know, how basically he holds this mentality of like how things used to be, which is even more like extreme than what you would just hear like a normal person that would use that term, like, oh, back in the day, you know, like, oh, well, back in the day you still had TVs and radios and stuff, like nothing's really changed. Like the shift to the industrial era was a pretty big leap for mankind, to say the least. Plus all the stuff with his father, which I mean probably was about normal or whatever.
It's fairly normal to at least back then, back when, you know, a lot of fathers were really very interested in the son to go into the family business. It was fairly common way back when to have a falling out with the father around between the ages of 16 and 18 years old. Again, it's not something that was wholly uncommon. The fact that his father was a civil servant is besides the point, although that could have explained you know, how Hitler was raised to have a rather political mindset, or to be more susceptible to getting involved in politics, since he grew up, you know, being raised to a certain extent by a politician. Although though he does not describe it in his own book, I've also heard that Hitler was kind of a slave to his mother. That he was very involved with his mother, and that he didn't spend much time with his father being away most of the time. You know, his father didn't go and, you know, beat him any more than people did back then. Like, you know, again, it wasn't like, you know, constant child abuse, but he said that he was described to have been almost cultishly devoted to his mother throughout his youth. So I'm not sure how that may have affected his mind. I know.
Do you remember where you read that?
I think it was on one of those like History Channel documentaries from like 10 years ago, something like that. I think it was a documentary describing the relationship between him and Eva Braun. Nothing much more than that. It was I think I watched it like 4 years ago or something like that. It
Mhm.
just stuck with me. So don't take it as gospel because I know it's the History Channel, but it was Hitler in his childhood was described to be very, very devoted to his mother throughout his childhood.
Um, I mean, his dad did die, and he did like his mom. Like, he even said so much in his book. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, he wasn't all like, "I love my mom," like awkwardly or anything. But
Yeah, and it wasn't something like it wasn't a Freudian type of deal, but it was
right,
sort of a a very yes mom mentality though. Um, so far as I know. Uh, but anyway, where do you want to go now?
uh, I guess let's just keep moving forward. So he gets to Vienna or whatever. Which I did want to add that like the whole uh, it's kind of cliched the whole younger fellow from more or less the country era moving into the big city. It's pretty much like everything into there, like how he describes like his awe when he came into the city and all the things that he saw that he never saw before and stuff like that. The cultural shock aspect of the entire like transfer or whatever is pretty cliched. What you would pretty much expect from like watching like movies or reading other stories of the same manner, or maybe experiences you've had yourself.
Hmm.
Uh, so then he gets to Vienna and he realizes that city life is vastly different than normal plebeian life out on the range or whatever. And I think that this is the spot where he really starts noticing things. And he even kind of hints at it in his book. He's like, he would see things like the way workers would be treated or that people would act like away from their families. Um, Different like society, political leaders and whatnot. And he would sit back and he would even say himself, he'd be like, I just sit back and observe. I'd watch this stuff. So I remember, I don't remember the exact quote or whatever, but I do remember him mentioning that when he would watch the political class argue and debate about politics, that he would just sit back and laugh because even then he still realized that all they were doing is just being blowhards more or less.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's when he really started to, I guess, formulate his opinions, his harder opinions about the world.
Yeah, because again, he's noticing sort of the class division type deal,
Mm-hmm.
and the growing resentment that a lot of people were having in a country that was only then, at least in comparison to Western Europe, was beginning to industrialize, and a lot of the political institutions had not really grown, uh, had grown proportionately in parallel. Um, so as a result, you start to see unrest in Austria. Um, which again, it makes sense because Austria was sort of become the kind of epicenter of the First World War, with with all of these different political groups vying for power, or nationalist groups trying to either get out of Austria, get back into Austria, or to look out for their new interests, such as those of Serbia and stuff like that. So I suppose he's noticing almost kind of the beginnings of the Balkan. Well, no, not necessarily the beginnings, but in the midst of the Balkan powder keg within Vienna and later on in Munich. Um, and I think it was around this time he met Gottfried Feder, which he founded the German Fighting League for the Breaking of Interest Slavery. One of the guys who would become one of the National Socialists movement, a member of the Reichstag in 1924. So he's starting to meet some of the guys he's going to go into politics with. Some of the people who would later become the National Socialist Workers' Party. At least, and that's on 200 page 209 of my edition, which again is the Manheim edition.
I remember when he was in Vienna that he wrote a lot about how he noticed the differences between like Germany, like Bismarck's Germany, and like Austria and how different it was. And one of his big things was that in Germany there was like a solid culture, and in Vienna there was not.
Yeah, cultural homogeneity versus what's a heterogeneous culture.
Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of pull between like the political powers and stuff like that.
Yep, everyone
Going back,
vying for a piece of the government pie. Different nationalist groups, different different social classes vying for permissions or privileges or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And this is like going back to his early days here at Vienna or whatever. This is like where I was talking about, like, this is where he started formulating his views. Like the time where he was starting to notice all this stuff was the time where he was starting to like get political, more or less. Like he wasn't out there speaking or whatever, but he openly wrote about like he would be having discussions with small groups of people or whatever, and like penning out his philosophy, bouncing ideas back and forth and stuff like that.
Yep, he would sit in on the Austrian parliament at that point, or I'm not sure what they called it in German, perhaps the Diet or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
But
yeah,
I know he sat
the political game, so to say.
Yeah, he didn't become involved in politics, but he definitely became an avid observer of political activity at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Second infantry.
Anything else on Vienna?
Nothing. Let's see. Nothing in particular. Nothing really stands out. Although I suppose.
Got anything on Munich? Because after Vienna, he moved on to Munich.
Let's see.
Which is what he described as like the like his happiest or his fondest memories were of Munich pre-World War One. I remember that much.
Okay, I'm a bit ahead then, because that's I'm on what's it, chapter 8, the beginning of my political activity, and he said that was after the end of November 1918. So that's after he went back home from the war. So let's see, it was before the regiment.
Well, I remember he went from Vienna to Munich, and he was ecstatic to be in Munich because he was absorbed into the actual German culture, the solidified German culture. Plus, it was like, much more like artsy than it was in Vienna. So I'm sure he absolutely adored that aspect of it. Then I remember him getting like different and separate political insight from Munich instead of just from Vienna, which obviously continued to further his personal philosophy and his views on politics and whatnot. But other than that, I can't really.
Well, here we are.
I'm pretty sure that was a part of the book where he's talking a lot about the history of Germany and Bismarck himself. What's the place? Habsburg. Talked a lot about Habsburg.
Yep. Let's see. Okay, so here we are. It's what's it? In addition to this, there was a heartfelt love which seized me for this city more than any other place that I had known. More from the first hour of my sojourn there, a German city. What a difference from Vienna. I grew sick to my stomach when I even thought back on this Babylon of races. So yeah, he liked Munich quite a bit, and this was he went to Munich the spring of 1912.
Sounds all right, yeah.
And let's see, this is when he had begun to criticize the Triple Alliance, at least. And he criticized a lot of the newspapers that he found there. And he also started to be very vocal in his hatred of the Slavs for how they had ruined Vienna and had ruined Austria. in general. Or this is what he meant by the Babylon of races, all the different peoples and cultures that were there that sickened him. Let's see. I'm just flipping through the pages here. Oh, what's it? He also talked about the reason why the Austrian Empire was collapsing was because of what he called Austrian Slavdom. That it, that even in 1914, was shattering the monarchy, or at least the core of the monarchy's power in Austria. So you see that he's still very attached to Austria, most likely from the position of it being a German state. But you can sort of tell why Slavs were also sent to the various concentration camps and death camps. And he also draws allusions between the Slavs and the Jews, saying that that Eastern Europe had become thoroughly Judaized, more so than Western Europe, which he said was Judaized during the period of the late Roman Empire, which he blames for its collapse.
Well, when he was in Vienna for the first time and then went to Munich, like this was around the time where he was like, I want to say indifferent towards Jews.
Yeah, like he says, like when he was at university for the short period that he was there, and when he was in school before he went to university, he said he had a Jewish classmate. He said the Jewish classmate, he was kind of introverted and all that stuff and didn't really associate with anyone else, but they thought, he thought he was an individual of esteem. He got good grades, all that stuff. He wouldn't have thought him any more than, say, someone a little bit more on the eccentric and reclusive side. And he held no ill will, and he thought of anti-Semites as being, or anti-Semitism in general to be a kind of disease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was very against the idea of like being against the Jews solely because they were a religious ethnicity or a religious sect. It's not that he didn't observe them and notice them and was able to spot them out or whatever, but he didn't correlate what he would later ascribe them as to what he saw them as while he was still in that younger mindset.
Yeah, because it's like when he was younger, he was a fairly liberal person, even for his time. It's not necessarily your average Joe in terms of political views, especially in a place that was still, a monarchy in all respects. But hold on, let me stop screen sharing. I've been staring at Schroner for long enough. Yeah.
His eyes are like two red pills that pierce into your soul. What is this?
There we go. But anyway, let's see. It was okay. Here we are. Certainly, we don't have to discuss these matters with the Jews. Okay, this is okay. Post Hitler's development of anti-Semitism. Yeah, I'm on the war propaganda section that came after Munich, because I was thinking we could then segue into his period during the First World War.
Well, before little caveat before we get to the Great War, there was a war before that that he mentioned quite a bit of there for a chapter or so. What was it? The I'll look it up.
I bet he's talking about one of the unification wars. They were already finished by the time he was born, but I suppose there were some Germans that might have romanticized them. So could it be one of those?
Yeah, it was one of those. He talked about watching pretty much all of it go down through the papers all day. It's not he wasn't actually in the war. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay, so it happened while he was alive. Okay, so that wasn't any of the wars of the German unification. Hold on, I'll look it up real quick for us.
Boer War, Boer War, Boer War, Boer War.
Let's see.
Yeah,
the
Russian Japanese War.
That must have been it. Actually, no, that's not it because Germany wasn't involved.
No, Germany wasn't involved.
I know, that's what I just said. Let's see. May have been the Second Boer War, but that went from 1899 to 1902. So, and the belligerents. Yeah, nobody. What's it? It was the South African Republic, the Cape Boers, the Orange Free State versus the British Empire. So that wasn't it. Let's see.
I remember whatever the war was between the Russians and the Japanese.
Yeah, that was
Hitler
the
sided
Russia.
with the Japanese, which probably goes back to the whole Slavic thing, maybe a little bit. And then around this time was when Ferdinand was assassinated.
Yep, at least during his times in Munich, most definitely. But that was what's it? The Russo-Japanese War went from 1904 to 1905. So again, that's still rather early. That may have been not even his times in Vienna. Well, let's see. Beginning of political activity, German Workers' Party. Let's see, the World War. Let's see, I'll go to page 126. If you'll bear with me, I will see if I can find what war he's speaking of.
Well, there was wars pre-World War I, several wars, and he was interested in them, to say the least. Studied them greatly, observed them, formulated more of his philosophy, formulated more of his opinions, and then Ferdinand was assassinated, which obviously took Germany into war, started the war.
Yep.
And that was when Hitler joined one of the armies there.
He joined the Second Bavarian, I believe. Second Bavarian Infantry Regiment.
Was he like 16, something like that?
I have to look this up now.
I'm pretty sure he was young, like by today's standards, young.
Let's see.
And then he started describing like his experiences, obviously, in the war. Now, there's actually a lot of interesting stuff here that I've, or at least in my opinion, in no particular order. Obviously, he talks about when he was gassed, which, ironically, I guess. Right. Yeah, I mean, how do you talk about Hitler and gas and not, correlate the two? But
yeah, it's a meme now.
Right. So yeah, he suffered from a gas attack himself. Described it as something that I guess didn't really necessarily worry him as it actually happened, but several moments later was one of the most agonizing things in his life. I think he temporarily lost his eyesight, was it?
Yep, he had temporary blindness. Some people also attribute it to his blindness being more psychological than gas, but we don't really know because it's like he took some gas to the face, so I'm sure his eyesight wasn't perfect even then. So, oh, and also his age, he was somewhere around like 24, because he was born in 89.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was something like 24 or 23, something like that.
Okay. I must be thinking of something else. Maybe when he went to Vienna, he was that young.
Yeah, he went to Vienna at age 16.
Okay. Um, so I remember him describing that. Obviously, it was painful, described as painful. I remember him saying that even more painfully so, he was taken off the battlefield. And while he was recovering is when pretty sure he got news that Germany had lost the war. And that was actually the most painful thing he said he had ever gone through. I remember him saying that, like, the only other time in his life he remembered crying, or the last time in his life he remembered crying, was like his father's death, or maybe even before then, something like that. He took the loss incredibly hard. He had a lot of pride for Germany. While he's describing all of his war experiences, he describes them with a lot of pride. A lot of pride for the soldiers. A lot of pride for the actions, the motivations, the defense, Germany's role, all this other stuff.
Yeah, he romanticized the war in his mind,
yeah.
and this is where I think he got a very, very strong sort of a Prussian militarist type of mindset that became part of his larger nationalist thought process, as far as like a nation is formed in war, and the best thing for a damaged people is to go to war, because then everything important comes, floats to the top. Everything that's great about a nation is shown in war, etc. Also, to go back to what you mentioned before with the Boer War and the Russo-Japanese War, that is in fact true. It's he described the Boer War was like, quote, lightning to me. And the Russo-Japanese War, what's it? Are you taking sides? And he indeed sided with the Japanese. In a defeat of the Russians, I saw the defeat of Austrian Slavdom. So yeah, he romanticized. He enjoyed both of those wars. Again, summer lightning. But yeah, it was around this time where he got a very militaristic streak. He was very pro-war. Now, he was no pacifist in his youth, describing all attempts to educate him in that direction coming to nothing, unquote. But it was at this point where he definitely, the war did not shatter him or disillusioned him to the practice of war. It was the exact opposite. It gave him a great deal of drive towards a pan-Germanist, a German nationalist type of militarism that would become a major portion of the state ideology, of the National Socialist movement. So you could describe this as, if you disregard all the
formulated his opinions, like, more so than anything in Vienna or Munich.
Exactly. This is his biggest red pill, so to speak. as to what he would become.
In multiple ways, actually. I remember when he's describing the war, and before, like, somewhere in between, like, him actually being in the war and sometime between the end, obviously. I remember him mentioning things about, like, propaganda and media related, and
and how the propaganda was far more effective on the other side, because it portrayed the enemy as monsters, that there was no hope against. While the other one was like all of the mainstream German newspapers were making war propaganda that he later described as Jewish, where it's like, we need to.
It was anti-Germany.
Yeah, it was like, okay,
in a sense.
yeah, we need peace. We need to be moderate. We
Yep.
need to hold back. We need to come to peaceful terms as soon as possible. Is like, no, peace had its chance. Rah rah.
It
So
was even
it was it's sort of like how modern propaganda is now, where it's like, oh, we're so anti-war until Syria crosses this line, and then as soon as we go to war, we start criticizing politicians, you know, and all that stuff. It's just is and actually, I think a lot of the parallels that I'm seeing here, um, is sort of like the whole a Babylon of races. You could just say that Hitler was reacting in a very extreme way against what was essentially a multicultural crisis in Austria. Which in the sense that multiculturalism, as in there are a whole bunch of different groups that are not necessarily coming from Austria, all battling, and vying for power. Not only do you have political turmoil, but you also have sort of a a hydrogenous culture, a heterogeneous culture, pardon, a heterogeneous culture that goes and that sort of aids in the downfall of a nation, as some people would consider it, such as Hitler. Um, and I think it's interesting because you can start to draw some rather ominous parallels between these times and those times. You just need to replace a couple of the words and purge yourself of racial rhetoric, and you pretty much have what a great deal of Western Europe and to some extent the United States is going through right now with the whole multicultural crisis and either advancements of industry or the decline of industry, forcing people to try to seek new kinds of employment. So it's kind of interesting. I didn't know that parallels could be easily be drawn between those times and these times. Now that I think about it, but I digress.
History repeats itself, man.
Yep. I try not to give myself to historicism and that kind of thing, because then it just encourages me to make a narrative that may or may not be there. But seeing this, it's frankly obvious that to some extent the times we're going through now are very similar to what Hitler and his generation were going through at that point.
And honestly, it's one of the things that people should worry about if they don't want to go back to those times. Maybe we need to solve the problem before it gets there. But I digress. Back to the book, because we can go on for hours.
Hitler wanted to solve that problem by Jove, he went and tried to freaking solve it. So, okay, we are being approached with a very similar problem in terms of multiculturalism and to some extent globalism, because this isn't the first time that a globalist crisis has aided in the crippling of nations in comparison to previous decades. The first one was in the 1890s, and you saw recessions and stuff like that, and a lot of far right movements developed in France and Italy as a result. Actually, it's rather interesting. You can take a look at it, and there's a book called The Anatomy of Fascism that sort of passingly goes over this topic. So you essentially have a globalist crisis that had been going on for the better part of 20 years, and you have a multicultural crisis, not necessarily being forced by state institutions on people, but by no means is it a non-issue. It was a more natural thing. They weren't just deliberately going and importing people from abroad. You had a whole bunch of these different nationalities that had been suppressed for centuries. And you have all this stuff starts to pop up, and you essentially have Hitler going through all of this, and he comes to the conclusion that it's like, okay, we must protect the German race, we must protect the Aryan race. So now that we're being approached with very, very similar times with a couple different permutations, such as political institutions deliberately importing people who, from what I've noticed, don't really want to be here either. just don't become a Nazi to solve the problem. Okay, we've already made that mistake once as a civilization. Let's not do that again. But again, I digress. Back to the book.
Well, it ultimately might be inevitable, but we'll see, I guess. Sorry about that. One of the things I remember and was most interesting, at least to me, because this is some of the things that I am particularly interested in, is from the beginning of the war, obviously the propaganda from the media was from the German side was like, oh yeah, we got to go to war, we got to defend Germany, blah blah blah, and then I can't remember if he actually like linked this to Jewish control or whether or not it was just strictly like media.
Well, he always at this point he was always linking the mainstream Jewish and German media to the Jews. Okay. At this point, and especially the world media and stuff like that. And he said it was because of a particular Jewish influence on how the war was conducted and how they were constantly making appeals to the materialistic interests of Germans rather than to the sort of spiritual and romantic side of war. And he said this is something that only the Jews do because the Jews are, they're greedy, they're materialistic, they're bourgeois. He was pretty much giving a textbook definition of Marx's bourgeoisie and then calling them the Jews.
Well, I remember one of his main issues being that they had won some battles, and which I guess in his opinion were pretty major battles. I don't remember what battles they were, and I'm not super keen on my World War I battles, but they had won some battles and they had celebrated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the people, obviously the soldiers celebrated, and the people back in Germany were celebrating. And every time one of these happened, the news would come out and they would basically say more or less along the lines like, oh, we need to act like proper Germans and we shouldn't be celebrating about these things. And
yeah, we
stuff
shouldn't
like that. And it really rubbed them wrong, which, I mean, if I was a soldier in a standing army and an inside active battle and we were winning battles and we were winning the war and the mouthpieces back home were saying that type of stuff, I probably would be fucking pissed about it myself, to be honest.
Yeah, I myself, I would not like to be shamed for indulging in some spirits and some, and rejoicing in the fact that I won a battle and that I'm still alive, and then I'm going to be shamed for it.
Yeah.
It's sort of why people say we lost the Vietnam War, even though we didn't. And like all the people who are coming back home.
And a lot of those soldiers resent the shit out of us still to this day.
Yeah. But by sort of the press kind of abandoning them, and even now my history teacher is saying that the United States was savage, that we were invading savages. And yes, most definitely there were people who acted like complete asshats over there. And I don't think it's a war we really should have gotten involved with. I think we should have left whatever war was going on to the French because it was their colony, and if they want to maintain their colony, that's fine. But it's like, the press was sort of portraying the United States as monsters. It's like, yes, we're all monsters in war, but do you think we should really focus on that? It's, and I think after
war isn't like exactly civil discourse, you know what I mean? Like
exactly, and to say that we should be engaging in civil discourse, yeah, that's fine, but going and pretty much calling our soldiers monsters and shaming them when they come back home is that's horrible. Don't do that to those guys. It's like because they just went out there and risked life and limb, and this is what they get. It's like, by all means, tell the truth, but like, be nice. It's genuinely awful, I think.
Well, he said he was under the impression that they were lightening up lightening up the situation, and more or less, I guess, like kissing ass to the people who were to come in and roll over them.
Yeah, pretty much going in and preparing Germany to, like, sort of not celebrating Germany as such, but saying it's like, oh, it's just another war between nations, la di da, and just and again, like you said, readying the enemy to invade a nation of extremely meek people, as he described, as like, or trying to make people meek in a time of war. So I can see where he got pissed, about that, and his current outlook on the Jews at this point most definitely doesn't reflect well on the media after that, because it's just all about the Jews at that point. So it just makes him hate the Jews even more, because everyone who disagrees with him is Jewish at that point.
Everybody I don't like is Jewish.
Yep. The eighth graders guide to political discourse. Well, the 8-year-old's guide to political discourse. But yeah, if anything, it's if everything else was the catalyst to his beliefs and all of that stuff, and the course of his life, it was the rest of his life was definitely set by the time he was in World War I, after he was discharged from active duty during World War I. That's when he became, that guy. That's when he was, Adolf Hitler, the concept.
That's when he started getting like really, really into like propaganda.
Yeah.
And this is where like his observationalism comes in, because I can't, despite what people even like think or like emotionally feel about Hitler or the whole situation, like the guy was really keen. Like he was a bright fellow. He wasn't like an intellectual or anything by any means, but he knew what he saw and he knew how to connect the dots. And this is the time and era where he picked up all of his like tricks, I guess, more or less, for his own propaganda machine.
Yep.
Goebbels as well and all that. Because they were doing the exact same stuff. They were essentially using propaganda as like an extra type of gun in the war, more or less. Like dropping leaflets and stuff. Their own press telling them not to be excited for wins. They'd be dropping like leaflets and stuff inside of German territory, telling them that they were going to lose the war and all this other stuff. The outside world was portraying them as basically like a bunch of savages and a bunch of idiots who couldn't do anything.
Yep. Home or the Hun.
And he saw how absolutely effective that was, because he was on the front lines and he knew that the soldiers were not giving up. He knew that the soldiers were winning. The soldiers had a winning attitude. They had the willpower. They had the drive and all that other stuff. But it was being drugged down by like the social aspect. You know what I mean? They weren't being backed by their country. So it was kind of degrading their willpower. You don't win a war if you don't feel like you need to press on, more or less.
Yeah. Whereas the opposite side thought they were fighting, essentially like an orc war.
Yeah.
And that's why it's like to see how strong Allied propaganda, or the propaganda of the Entente was. All you have to do is go and read Lord of the Rings, and you'll see, what the vision of what the Germans was to J.R.R. Tolkien, because that's where orcs come from. Like, just look at the propaganda that they show. It's like what the Huns look like, what the Germans look like, and they look like early concept art for orcs. That's how effective the propaganda was. Like, the de facto monster in fantasy literature came about because of the sheer strength of the various pieces of propaganda made about Germans in the Triple Entente. That's how good it was.
Yeah. And in Hitler's mind, this was all brought on by like social Marxists.
Yeah, cultural Marxism, kind of.
I mean,
or at least the version of what that was back then. And to be fair, yes,
a lot of it was, not all of it, because we're talking about wartime here, and there's a lot of different factors. But Not taking anything away from his argument, there definitely was a lot of social Marxism at play involved with all of this anti-Germany propaganda, to say the least.
Oh yeah, because you can see, look at the parties that took power after the war.
Mm-hmm.
Like you get the Social Democratic Party, and you get the Communist parties, and you get the various other not utopian but Marxist socialist parties coming into power, like those led by Rosa Luxemburg and stuff like that. And it was one of the major reasons why the Nazi party came to power was because of and again, this is a source that I have from The Anatomy of Fascism. Again, it's a really good book. I suggest it to everyone who wants to see how fascism in general developed. But in Germany in particular, in order to halt the expansion of all of these different socialist and communist parties that came about after the war, who had a large amount of strength coming about in terms of, is like, look what all of these parties did. They took us to war. All of us socialist parties and all our communist parties were all anti-war, so vote for us, and we'll get rid of all the wars for the rest of time. All that stuff. That they had a great deal of motivating factors towards getting more power. Seeing this, a lot of German conservative parties, like the Christian socialist parties, or the various monarchists, or just conservatives in general, like people who were not unlike Metternich of Austria or something like that, in Germany at least. They helped to elevate the Nazi party to power because the Nazis were becoming extremely popular, and they pretty much entered into a party coalition, something that's not very rare in European politics. There was no bipartisan type of thing. There was no two-party system. So it was pretty much the Nazi party became the front for a whole bunch of different conservative party coalitions to stop the expansion of socialism in post-war Germany. And in the end, that's why you have the Night of Long Knives, because that was pretty much the Nazis going and killing all of their conservative opponents and allies to solidify their power. So as far as the whole Marxist and social Marxist rhetoric, that is very much true, because they were getting a strong foothold in German politics during and near the end of the war. Sorry about the rant there.
That was more communistic than it was socialist.
Well, yeah, but it was just, again, it was a party coalition.
And Hitler wanted to come along with groups. More socialist-esque policies.
Mm-hmm. Well, remember, back then, socialism was pretty much just that was the first stage. Marxist socialism was just the first stage of, let's take over the government, then use the government to redistribute wealth to bring about the communist utopia. So every communist is going to start off at a socialist stage.
And it was also more, it was less just economical, but it was also implied socially.
Yeah.
Not like socialist as in the political ideology, but social as in the citizenry, the attitude and outlook of the people.
Mm.
The cultural Marxism, if we want to use a word from today's era.
Yeah, although that's become a bit of a buzzword, I try to avoid it. I just go say, if it's something that's about economics, I say Marxist. If it's something about the social sphere, I'll say neo-Marxist, because then neo-Marxism is a much better umbrella term, because it includes not necessarily cultural Marxism, but it includes the people of the Frankfurt School and of the postmodernists and stuff like that.
That's a good way of looking at it.
So I just use that because that, and it actually has some grounds, because neo-Marxist is what they often refer to themselves as.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I can't, if I go and call them a cultural Marxist, they'll just call me a conservative and tell me to go fuck myself. Whereas if I call them a neo-Marxist, they'll be like, yes, I'm a neo-Marxist. Hi. So I just, I call them what they call themselves. Unless you're Antifa, then I just call them fascists. But
no, I just call them retards.
So many names must be used in addressing those people. Jesus Christ. Oh
They're
yeah,
filth. They're
there
filth.
there's another social parallel. You know, rise of socialism and communism of the Marxist bent in
The
in a
main
very
difference,
very
we
in
can
a
make this
very
really
unstable
easy.
country.
We can make this really easy. The main difference was after World War One, the people that came in were more or less the people in control were outside influences. Um, they were very multinational. Some would say globalist.
Internationalist, yeah, because
Yes.
that's what communism was in general. It
Right.
was an internationalist movement.
And they would have socialist-esque policies, communist-esque policies, and stuff like that. And Hitler did also to a certain extent when he got into power. But the main difference was that it was all national. So it was all like German. You know, it wasn't like outside influence. It was all like, it might be socialist, but it's German socialist. Like it's us for our people, not them
Yeah, it was
control
socialism with
over
a
our
nationalist bent. It's sort of like the Front National is now.
people. So, so the war is over,
Yeah,
and he learned some things about war. Really, obviously disappointed with the outcome, as I mentioned before.
galvanized politically as a result.
Obviously, going to leave somebody in his position as someone who kind of wants like that revenge. You know what I mean? Maybe not actively, but you know, at least passively at the back of your mind, like you got to go home and lick your wounds. You know what I mean? Nobody likes a
Yeah,
loss.
high resentment towards those responsible for the war. This is
Hmm.
something that was reflected in Mussolini's rhetoric as well, since
Hmm.
Italy sort of got a bad hand at the
Also,
Treaty of Versailles.
so goes. He recovers. Learned a lot about propaganda, what was effective, what wasn't effective,
Yep.
which would later obviously help him out a lot. Um, it was at this time he actually more or less kind of started to have the desire to get into politics, maybe partially due to that, wanting to get even thing or wanting to take control back of his country. I think I remember
Yep.
him
He was
saying
still
things like, you know, we might have lost this war or whatever, but the German people want our state back, and there's nothing you can do to stop us from getting our state back.
Oh, actually, can I interrupt for a second? I just need to go to
Yeah.
the bathroom because I've been drinking too much.
Oh. Intermission. One thing I can talk about while he's gone is that sometimes, after knowing about these things that we're talking about, you always hear people say Trump is orange Hitler, Dorito Hitler, literally Hitler, whatever. And they draw these parallels, or don't. Most of the time, they don't draw any parallels. Or they, when they do draw parallels, they're pretty much a stretch. I can see the likening between like current times and the times in between, or the times around and in between World War I and World War II. Essentially, what they had was a country that was appearing to be controlled by outside influences, and the people who were actually the natives of those countries were more or less being used and abused by the system, and were, to say the least, the poor and the downtrodden. Obviously, they didn't want that. So they either found a way or jumped onto a bandwagon that was leading the way to something different. something that would give them more control over their nation. And the parallel I link between these two isn't really have anything to do with Trump per se, but more or less the attitude of some of the Western nations right now, where they're willing to do things that objectively, from if you take yourself outside of the box, can be perceived as very negative, like mass deportations and stuff like that. And while we haven't actually gotten to that point yet, I don't doubt that it's not a possibility in the future. I actually can see, now granted we have like nukes and stuff, so we're not gonna, I don't see us going into any full scale like World War III, like traditional warfare or whatever. But I can see a lot of these countries turning into very, not like the good type of nationalism where you just have pride in your country and you want what's best for you, but like a more extreme form of nationalism where we start seeing like ethno-national states, stuff like that.
Well, you see some of that stuff going on in Africa right now. That's what you had when they were rejecting colonial power. They started turning towards, Pan-Africanism and an African ethno-nationalism, and that's why I see with some of the stuff that's been going on in not Uganda. Well, what's the other one? Where the one where the president pretty much kicked all the white farmers out and started a massive famine. Can't remember which one that was.
Shit, yeah, me either. Zimbabwe? No, it wasn't Zimbabwe.
Yeah, Zimbabwe.
It was Zimbabwe. You know about all the stuff they're doing in South Africa right now?
Oh, I've seen some shit, man.
I know. Yeah, I know, right?
That's fine. It's fine. South Africa's a fucking shithole. Fine, you guys can have it. Have fun. All of you white South Africans or any of the black South Africans that have any fucking sense, come over here. We'll take you gladly. That's fine. We need more farmers. We need more people anyway. We haven't exceeded our comfort zone in terms of population yet. We're massive. So come on over. Any people who go to Cape Town University, just get the fuck out. Seriously, man. Before you get struck with voodoo lightning, right?
Yeah.
Ugh, Jesus Christ.
All right. So where were we? After
get out,
All right, so we're now post World War One.
All right, so he's returned to Munich.
He's returned from Munich. He's healed up or healing up.
Yep, he's still in service.
He's now starting to get into politics.
Yep, he was told to sit in. He was told by his bosses at the military actually to sit in at a few meetings of this new German Workers' Party.
Exchanges?
What?
Oh, you're talking about politics. Okay.
Yep. And he was told to sit in at a few of these meetings, and this is the beer hall where that putsch would happen in 1922, something like that. And that's where he went there. He sat in on a few meetings and grew to like the movement, and later on just straight up joined them, and became that epic orator for the party that made him so popular and encouraged them to go and do the beer hall putsch that subsequently got a shit ton of guys shot. And that's where he started writing the book. I think at the beginning of my edition he writes that he writes the names of the various people who died for whom that he's writing the book, the people who died during the beer hall putsch.
Yeah, I thought that was like his book was dedicated to those people.
Yep. Yep, 1923.
He goes. Also, besides that, he what was I saying? I remember he goes and he learns. don't know if it's like auditoriums or whatever, but he went and learned. I know he wasn't in school, so maybe they do like a sit-in lectures or something like that, maybe.
Perhaps.
But he learns about stock exchange and other capitalist things.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that he, quite frankly, wasn't necessarily too excited about these things. Also likened them to being controlled by Jews.
Because the Jews are Marxists and capitalists.
Well, I mean, I've always said that Jews aren't a hive mind. You know what I mean? Like they have.
Well, I know, but if he's going to be, it's thus far he's identified Jews as being a person of a particular mindset,
well,
and controlling various interests, and
he smooths it out. Hold on, well, he smooths it out in the end. We'll get to it at the end.
Okay.
He does smooth it out in the end. I'll give him credit for that. But one of his main things is, about the Jews is that they're the merchant culture, right? They're the merchants.
Yeah, what he described,
the lenders.
Yeah,
the parasites. Yes. So obviously he's linking the stock exchanges and like these outside like corporations and stuff, obviously to Jews, which unironically were also being controlled by, triple parentheses Jewish names and stuff like that. So it's not like he was wrong inherently. His final solution might not have been, the best thing for him, but still. So after the war, obviously, so now he's got the loss of the war that was perpetrated by a lot of Jews. He's got the propaganda that was against him, his country, and his countrymen, and his fellow soldiers.
Yep.
That was also perpetrated by some Jews. Now he's got this new Germany that he has to deal with, which not too many people like of the German citizenry were too happy about. Of course, the upper class, they were obviously loving it. And all of this stuff was also being perpetrated by some Jews.
And then what's it? Let's see. And at that point, he becomes radicalized, and more. He finds a home for his political ideology in the National Socialist German Workers' Party.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This is when he starts doing the sitting in on the party, like the what are they called? Like the meetings. Yeah, meetings. Starts sitting in on party meetings and stuff like that, learning the the lay of the party and all that stuff.
Yep, and then starts getting up to speak himself, being thoroughly taken in by the party, becomes one of its most powerful orators, and sort of becomes the face of the party after that. In terms of terms of public relations, and the guy who gets up to give all the really good speeches.
Yeah.
That guy.
Well, there's a bit in between that. There's like the party was like uber small, right?
Yeah, it was something like
3, 5, 6 people, something like that at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then he mentioned that like every week they'd have a meeting. And this was before he was speaking, and it'd be like 3 people this week and 5 people the next week and 8 people the next week and so on and so on. It would just slowly start like gaining momentum. And I don't think he actually spoke until they moved to like higher venues. Somewhere where there's like capacities of like over 100 people. I don't remember the exact number. But I do remember that it was like very localized, like, I don't want to say pubs because it's not the right part of the word, but local bars and stuff.
Beer halls.
Yeah, beer halls. Yeah, duh. How did I not know that?
It was only the name of the revolution they tried to start.
I know. Like I said, I've been awake for 28 hours.
That's fine. You're doing very well.
Oh my god, yeah. My eyelids are like fucking bricks right now. So they did the beer halls, and then they moved up. I can't remember the name of the guy who was like speaking before them or before Hitler or whatever. But I think he mentioned something like the guy wasn't really too into it, or he tried to backpedal. I remember one thing.
I think it was Strasser, because that sounds like Strasser. Strasser was part of the left wing of the Nazi Party, because they had a left and a right wing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I remember them talking about trying to build support and get people to come and listen to them or whatever. And they would make flyers and hand out flyers and stuff like that. And then they made better flyers and, basically the same stuff you would do now by starting a small business or political movement or band or whatever, and they would get people. And I remember one part from the book, they were growing and growing and growing and growing. And then they moved to a location, one of the bigger locations, and less people came from then, like, I guess a previous one or whatever. There was a drop off, a slight drop off. And whoever was the current, like whoever was leading in the speaking, was trying to use that as or at least in Hitler's eyes, because he's the one who wrote the book, right? Was trying to use that as an excuse to like back down or back out. And Hitler fought against this, obviously, not physically, but I was like, no, we keep pushing. And apparently that was just like a little hiccup, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And that was at the point where like he kind of threw his hat in the ring as being like the speaker, and found out that he actually did a really good job of it.
Yep. Let's see. And I think it was around this time. I think it was 1928 when they were fully canonized. It was around the time where you start getting the formation of party ideology, which is sort of my element, because that's what I've been taking a look at for the paper that I've been trying to be writing. But
yeah, I think that's where we're at. So go ahead.
Yeah. So should I go over the 25 points?
Of the German Workers' Party?
Yep.
Yeah, totally do it. Because I don't have the 25 points ahead of me, but I do know some of them. But if you got all 25 of them right in front of you, man, go ahead.
All right, I will screen share. Where is it? Oh gosh, here it is. All right, here we are.
Look at you. You're probably on like 8 lists right now.
Well, probably. Well, no, it's the history.
Don't worry. You actually have to blow yourself up and die before they actually come after you and say, "Oh, well, he was on some lists." But I digress. That's a totally different topic.
As soon as I went on 4chan, I was on a fucking list, man. I don't give a damn.
I just want to know how many lists I'm on, and I hope it's over like 500. I really hope I'm on every list right now.
I hope the FBI is watching me fap so they can throw up every single time I turn on my computer. Because seriously, it would be hilarious. But anyway, point number 1: we demand the union of all Germans in a great Germany on the basis of the principle of self-determination of all peoples. That sounds like that's just textbook like 19th century European nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
That's nothing out of the ordinary. Base of the current nationalist canon, is Giuseppe, Garibaldi and stuff like that. Like those are all just, that's fine, that's regular. 2, we demand that the German people have rights equal to those of all nations, and that the peace treaty of Versailles and Saint-Germain shall be abrogated. That makes sense, since the Treaty of Versailles pretty much crippled Germany. In many respects, at least. They had a small boom period during the early 1920s, and after that they sort of got effed. Mass, hyperinflation and stuff like that.
Which guess who we blame that on?
The Jews.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were there for it. So, I mean, in his defense, I can see how easily it would be to blame them for the entirety of that. There were definitely some Jewish individuals who had a hand in that or whatever. My only issue when he blames the Jews is that he blames like all Jews, and not to be
Yeah.
like hashtag not all guy or whatever, but I've
Well, no,
also
there's a reason why Jewish people are overrepresented in the upper classes, and that goes all the way back to the Middle Ages, whereas they were pretty much the only people allowed to be financiers under Christian law,
and
since
they
they
pass
weren't.
it down.
Yeah, and they pass it down, and when you keep getting expelled and kicked out of places and stuff like that, you try to find a way of getting a permanent, universally valuable, and easily transported wealth. So when all of your assets are seized, you can escape with just a chest of it. And so, of course, you get a culture that completely develops around getting gold. And when that became the standard of currency during the industrial age, well, look at that. Half of the middle class is comprised of Jewish people. So that's why they're so overrepresented in politics and business, is because they were made like that by religious bigotry during the Middle Ages. And I'm not going pointing fingers and saying, oh, the Christians did it, the Catholics did it, the Muslims did it. It's like every single religious group, including Buddhists, to some extent, because there were some Jews living in southern India, ended up doing it at some point. So it's like an entire world culture develops around acquiring gold, because it's the only thing you can hold on to. When it'll happen eventually, you're gonna get kicked out. So,
all right, we'll go through the tenets, and
but yeah,
and I'll be right back.
All right. Number 3, we demand land and territory, colonies, for the maintenance of our people and the settlement of our surplus population. This is obviously the need for Lebensraum and stuff like that. And you can see that reflected in some modern rhetoric in American Nazi circles, where it's like, we demand, for the preservation of our white children and all that stuff. Let's see. 4, only those who are our fellow countrymen can become citizens. Only those who have German blood, regardless of creed, can be our countrymen. Hence, no Jew can be a countryman. That's kind of obvious. No explanation needed. They didn't really have a love of Jewish people. Also, that's where you start seeing a great deal of the holy racial ideology. Those who are not citizens must live in Germany as foreigners and must be subject to the law of aliens. Okay, so that's basic citizenry type stuff. Nothing wholly abnormal about that, even in other nations. 6, the right to choose the government and determine the laws of the state shall belong only to citizens. That makes sense. We therefore demand that no public office of whatever nature, whether in the central government, the province, or the municipality, shall be held by anyone who is not a citizen. Again, it's just common sense. We wage war against the corrupt parliamentary administration, whereby men are appointed to posts by favor of the party without regard to character and fitness. This is just, being against the spoils system, more or less. And to no playing favorites in politics, just a point based on merit and character. We demand that the state shall above all undertake to ensure that every citizen shall have the possibility of living decently and earning a livelihood. If it should not be possible to feed the whole population, the aliens, non-citizens, must be expelled from the Reich. That's just a nationalist socialism, more or less. This is where I get sort of, I sort of get when my teachers go and say that that the National Socialismus movement was not a socialist movement. It's true in the sense that they weren't a Marxist socialist movement, but they most definitely had a great deal of socialist influences.
Oh yeah.
8, any further immigration of non-Germans must be prevented. We demand that all non-Germans who have entered Germany since August 2nd, 1914 shall be compelled to leave the Reich immediately. Well, that's just mass deportation. Get out, more or less. That's kind of extreme.
Normies get the fuck out.
Yeah, more or less. 9, all citizens must possess equal rights and duties. Makes sense. Completely natural at this point. 10, the first duty of every citizen must be to work mentally or physically. No individual shall do any work that offends against the interests of the community to the benefit of all. Yikes. That is some grade A collectivism right there. No room for individuals in this movement, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
That's also something that they sort of got from Christian socialist circles, where everyone works for everyone else, everyone is their brother's keeper, etc.
La communism.
Yep. Although with communism, at least Marx's dream is that only some people would have to work and other people could enjoy leisure. I don't know. It's not something that's wholly exclusive to either tenet of socialism. That's just a socialist universal. Therefore, we demand that all unearned income and all income that does not arise from work be abolished. Okay, so that's pretty much laws against inheritance, I assume. That's also something that comes from socialist circles. Since every war imposes on the people fearful sacrifices in blood and treasure, all personal profit arising from war must be regarded as treason to the people. We therefore demand the total confiscation of all war profits. This is something that I'm sure came about from a lot of the veterans who were in the group. Similar laws came about as a result of similar laws, or at least pushes for it, happened within Mussolini's fascist movement. So this is something that wholly came about as a response to World War I. It was also something that was expressed in various other socialist circles. And nowadays, everyone complains about war profiteering and all that stuff, regardless of the fact that without that profit, there wouldn't be any weapons being made. But whatever.
Well, this is one of the things that they directly used on like the Jewish higher ups.
Yeah, so is it going and calling Jews war profiteers as an excuse to get rid of all their shit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 13, we demand the nationalization of all trusts. That's, again, grade A socialism. Nothing new there. 14, we demand profit sharing in large industries. It's also socialist. It's actually something that was more omnipresent in American socialism than German socialism, if I'm correct. Though I focus more on America in general, so that might just be my bias. Or my lack of knowledge, anyway. 15, we demand a generous increase in old age pensions. That's either American conservatives or just general socialism again there.
I think that's directly just from him being in the war.
Yeah. What, old age pensions?
Yeah, kind of like
that's essentially just proto social security right there.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually one of the many of Roosevelt's policies were directly inspired by Nazi actions during the early days, before they really started to come out as being like, okay, these guys are fucking nutcases. 16, we demand the creation and maintenance of a sound middle class, the immediate communalization of large stores, which will be rented cheaply to small tradespeople, and the strongest consideration must be given to ensure that small traders shall deliver the supplies needed by the state, provinces, and municipalities. That's also sort of I wouldn't put it as socialist here, but it's socialism in general. Although this is definitely the more nationalist bent to it. This looks like something that Mussolini was talking about.
There's also a common trend between who owns all of these means of production that he's trying to take these from. Also,
yeah,
give you a hint.
Yeah,
he didn't like them.
17, we demand an agrarian reform in accordance with our national requirements and the enactment of a law to to expropriate the owners without compensation of any land needed for the common purpose, the abolition of ground rents, and the prohibition of all speculation in land. Take away all land from Jews, pretty much, is to expropriate the owners without compensation of any land needed for the common purpose. Okay, you might as well just say we should be able to take anyone's land whenever we fucking want.
Mm-hmm. For the propagation of the German people.
Yep. The abolition of ground rents. Ground rents, again, targeting financiers and lenders. And the prohibition of all speculation on land. Again, financiers and lenders. I can see where he's specifically targeting social classes that have a high Jewish population. You know, certain things like that. We demand that ruthless war be waged against those who work to the injury of the common welfare. Traitors, usurers, profiteers, etc., are to be punished with death, regardless of creed or race. I think that is going against the internationalists and the communists.
Mm-hmm.
And
he hated communism.
Yep. 19. We demand that Roman law, which serves a materialist ordering of the world, be replaced by German common law. That's pan-Germanism, Volkisch movement, etc. Especially since Germany didn't really have the best relationship with Rome. Let's see. 20. In order to make it possible for every capable and industrious German to obtain a higher education and thus the opportunity to reach into positions of leadership, the state must assume responsibility of organizing thoroughly the entire cultural system of the people. The curricula of all educational establishments shall be adapted to practical life. The conception of the state idea, science of citizenship, must be taught in the schools from the very beginning. We demand that especially talented children of poor parents, whatever their station or occupation, be educated at the expense of the state. No Child Left Behind Act, anyone?
A bit more extreme than that.
Well, yeah, I know. This is the last part really struck at that, though. I was about halfway through. It's like, should I be saying this in Bernie Sanders accent? Because this, Jesus Christ. And so it's like, again, the teaching of culture. So I assume it's, we should be allowed to teach our racial ideology in these schools, and to breed loyalty to the state via state education.
Well, the science of citizenship that must be taught in the schools is leans back towards this propaganda piece is also.
Yep.
Indoctrination.
Yep. 21. The state has the duty to help raise the standard of national health by improving maternity welfare centers, by prohibiting juvenile labor, by increasing physical fitness through the introduction of compulsory games and gymnastics, and by the greatest possible encouragement of associations concerned with the physical education of the young. Hitler Youth, or at least, one of the major things, and essentially raising a generation of soldiers.
Soldiers, yep.
As well as, providing maternity welfare. Hitler was a feminist, you guys. Be an egalitarian. 22. We demand the abolition of the regular army and the creation of the National Folk Army. Essentially, get rid of the Wehrmacht because we know they're going to be a problem later on. Essentially that was targeting conservative opponents before they went and purged them, more or less, as well as instituting their own parallel military institutions, the militia that the party itself ran, the SA, later on the SS. So again, that's just gaining control quickly over military institutions. 23. We demand that there be a legal campaign against those who propagate deliberate political lies and disseminate them through the press in order to make possible the creation of a German press. We demand A, all editors and their assistants on newspapers published in the German language shall be German citizens. Jewish people get out.
Fake news get out.
Yeah, fake news. B, non-German newspapers shall only be published with the express permission of the state. They must not be published in the German language. All financial interests in or in any way affecting the German newspaper shall be forbidden to non-Germans by law. And we demand that the punishment for transgressing this law be the immediate suppression of the newspaper and the expulsion of the non-Germans from the Reich. And no more free press, and you must be a citizen even to engage in that limited press. Let's see. Newspapers transgressing against the common welfare shall be suppressed. We demand legal action against those tendencies in art and literature that have a disruptive influence upon the life of our folk, and that any organizations that offend against the foregoing demand shall be dissolved. 24. We demand freedom for all religious faiths in the state, insofar as they do not endanger the existence or offend the moral and ethical sense of the Germanic race. Okay, I suppose that last part, so far as they do not endanger. So you can pretty much be any religion as long as you're not Jewish. The party as such represents the point of view of a positive Christianity without binding itself to one particular confession. It fights against the Jewish materialist spirit within and without, and it is convinced by a lasting recovery of our folk can only come about from within, on the principle common good before individual good. Gabriel, if you're watching, there's your collectivism for you. Because I know he made a video about it recently, so I figured it might interest him. In order to carry out this program, we demand the creation of a strong central authority in the state, the unconditional authority by the political central parliament of the whole state and all of its organizations, the formation of professional committees and of committees representing the several estates of the realm, to ensure that the laws promulgated by the central authority shall be carried out by the federal states. Okay, so point 25, give us all the power now. The leaders of the party undertake to promote the execution of the foregoing points at all costs, if necessary, at the sacrifice of their own lives. Jesus. Okay. Well, there are the 25 points of Hitler's Nazi Party as espoused in Mein Kampf during the several years of the party's roots in the various beer halls in Germany.
Yes, so, and it was intentionally made to all of it to sound very aggressive and obviously opposing parties took this as a threat, which is what led up to the long knives and all those other events and stuff like that.
Yep. That was pretty much purging. The Night of Long Knives was essentially purging all of the members of the party that did not wholly support the 25 points. So when the Toxic Alliance was finished, all of the people that the party deemed toxic were purged. This included both conservative and political opponents, allies of the movement, so members of the conservative coalition that helped get the Nazi Party into power in the Reichstag. And again, party leaders that either opposed Hitler's vision, or other leaders who sided with Hitler. So this included the Strassers and stuff like that. And some of the people who were the more moderate or even the left-leaning members of the Nazi Party, the people who were more on the utopian socialist side of the movement. But do you have any thoughts, feelings, opinions? I'll send you a link so you can open it up yourself, so you can go through it at your own pace.
When were they doing Bolshevism?
Huh?
When was all the Bolshevik revolution, all that stuff going on?
Oh, 1917 through the early 1920s.
About this time?
Yeah, a lot of the anti-communist rhetoric and a lot of the like the Social Democratic Party and all the socialist and communist parties were coming about and gaining more power and support due to the success of the Bolshevik overthrow of the new social democracy that had deposed what's it the last of the czars.
Which
So they were emboldened by that. Rosa Luxemburg had known and had communicated with Lenin at various points. And he was in German socialist and communist circles for quite some time before being repatriated.
and Hitler wasn't really big on, to say the least, communism before all the Bolshevism happened. And then when it happened, obviously, that did nothing but help him and the German people's lives. And also insofar as the fact that most of those who were pushing that revolt in Russia coincidentally happened to be Jewish themselves.
Yep, and members of the German state in general, because they sent Lenin back in order to ferment discontent within Russia. So on the condition that he ended the war, because he was largely a staunch communist and thus a pacifist and all that stuff. Not that stopped him from mass murdering people,
Right.
But
well, the one thing, I guess one of the points I'm trying to get across is that like Hitler didn't,
wherever Hitler saw opponents of Germany, he saw a large number of them being Jews, essentially.
Right. And it's not like he made it up, right?
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that many of his political opponents ended up being Jewish. I just think that he saw that the fact that they were Jewish somehow meant something.
Right. Well, even beyond that, because I can give and take in that area, because as I've said before, I always fall back on the old adage, like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I'm the type of person, like, if there is corruption in power, then it needs to be taken over by the people. And I don't care if it's like Jewish corruption, Catholic corruption, atheistic corruption. I don't care what the racial or ideological like perspective of the corruption is. Like, corruption is corruption, and the people, I feel like, deserve not to have like corrupt leaders and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that aside, I just do like to make the point that like some people often think that like Hitler was just like such a great orator and he was hypnotic, and he almost had these like vampire like capabilities, and he was he's just this guy who hated Jews for no fucking reason. It's like that's objectively not necessarily true. Like, this was a sentiment that was felt amongst most Germans. Well, maybe not most Germans, but I guess if we took a percentage, probably most Germans, because a lot of them were being fucking abused by this system anyway. So when someone so happened to come by, I've been like, oh, hey, Hans, what's got you down today? Oh, I fucking lost my house to these fucking lenders, and I lost my business because fucking interest or whatever, insert X fucking reason. Oh, well, Hans, did you know that so-and-so that is in charge of all this stuff is a Jew? And same, your other problem and your other problem and your other problem. And maybe this one problem, not so much as a Jew, but these other 5 problems after that, those are controlled by Jews. So like, the people in Germany weren't, I guess, inherently wrong in blaming Jews for their problem. I think the part that was wrong
is that they were blaming them because they were
all
Jewish.
Jews. Well, they were blaming all Jews for that. Like,
yeah, they thought the reason why these people were so terrible was because they're Jewish and not simply because they were just terrible and corrupt.
exactly.
In some cases or many cases, and that's something where a lot of people fall in. You can see it with the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm-hmm.
You can
It's
see it's
perception.
like, yeah, because now it's all whites. Like, all whites are inherently privileged. All whites need to abdicate their places so that people of color can be in places in society, and it becomes a racist movement.
One cop pulled me over one time. I didn't do anything. All cops are bad.
Yeah, exactly. And it got to that point, and then boom, you have institutionalized anti-Semitism, or an institutionalized racial ideology, and a lot of people, I don't think they knew what they were getting into, but they didn't, because they weren't big on, I don't think anyone in Germany was really big on racial ideology back then, or at least not to the extent that the Nazis did. But it was like, again, it was with the Nazis, it was sort of like it's either this or yeah, it was like it was either this or it's either we take the Nazis and the conservative coalition, or we take
or we keep getting bent over by the powers that be, and the powers that be just so happen to be primarily Jewish.
Yep, either that or we get taken over by the communists and the social democrats.
Mm-hmm. If the Jews in pre-World War II, the people that were in control of all of the things like the newspapers and the lenders and the people who owned the property and the people who owned all the stores and all this stuff, if those people weren't Jews and they were Asians, it would have been
the same thing.
Yeah,
and if there was no racial link, it would probably turn into a class conflict. It would be the bourgeoisie, and that's why Hitler always goes and equates. It always equates them with with Jews with either being bourgeois or something like that, and he labels the entire group pretty much saying it's like they're a bunch of nomadic parasites that are only nomadic because people kick them out when they're when they start to get when they can't take the parasite anymore, and that's where you get that's when you get nutcases into power.
Well, that's because of that's just because of human nature, like the hive mindset of human beings. Like,
yeah,
you said earlier, and like I've said before, like the Jews are, since way before pre-World War II, in between the two world wars, since way before that time, they've been a merchant culture.
Yeah. And because of mostly because of toxic environments. You can see this in a lot of other cultures too, like the Chinese in Cambodia, or the or the Armenians in various parts of the Middle East. You see this happen all the time, and they also end up being the people who tend to get genocided a lot of the time, because people grow resentful because you see a successful and healthy, middleman minority. Or middle class. Not only that you see them as and they're easy scapegoats.
It's not even that they're successful; it's that they're abusing their power.
And that's not always the case, though. Because here's the thing: can you say that all businesses that have
abuse
power,
is perception, like based on perception?
Okay, perceived abuse. Okay, right. Okay.
And I always I'll tell people this or whatever. They'll be like, oh, well, they just hated the Jews and blah, 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 blah. And my grandpa was Jewish and he, was murdered and whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, I understand that. And I agree with you that, your grandpa was just a humble farmer or shopkeeper, whatever the case may be, or just a random fucking guy. You know what I mean? Didn't own anything, was just a random dude who had a job just like everybody else and just so happened to be Jewish and was rounded up and killed and murdered and blah, blah, blah. I was like, I get that, and I don't agree with that, but perception is a very powerful, powerful thing. So just like people today, you have a lot of people that are like just anti-Muslim, right? That's because the people who are doing the fucked up shit, and a lot of people who are like really wealthy, who are being said to be funding all these people that do fucked up shit, happen to be fucking Muslim.
Yep.
It's just the way it is. It's just human nature.
Yep. And it's like, and here's the thing. That's the thing. That's why whenever I go, I say I hate Islam in general, much the same way that I hate every other religion, because I'm an atheist.
I don't hate the people. I hate the ideology.
Yeah, and I hate the ideology that goes. And here's the thing. I don't take the standpoint where it's like, you know, I've seen recently that the only difference between left and right is, you know, the women are oppressed here, says the left, and then, you know, the right says, no, the women are oppressed there, let's go get them, you know. Whereas, like, you know, and then you know, the right wing sends people off to war in the Middle East because, you know, misogyny and all that stuff. But then it's like, okay, well, if Islam is such a patriarchal culture, then how come a whole bunch of guys don't go over there? You know, it's quite obvious. It's because it's not a misogynistic culture. It's a misanthropic culture, and all that stuff. So it's something that is an ideology that values death over life. You know, and that's why, you know, the whole heaven thing is such a huge deal over there, and why people are so willing to go and kill themselves to get this, you know, to get this unforeseeable, unknown reward after death. And that's generally why I hate Islam, like, as a blanket. And I feel contempt in general, much the way I feel contempt for anyone who's over, like, hugely religious in general, because they focus so much on what happens after instead of, you know, what's happening here now. And it's something that's intrinsic to almost all ideologies now. You know, it's not just religion, it's all ideologies. And so that's generally why I hate it. But I feel like I'm digressing a bit. But in order to make a semi-awkward segue, you see this in a lot of different radical ideologies. It's like, you know, it's like, this group bad, you know, let's go get that group. And then after that group is done, you either go to heaven or there's utopia, essentially. So it's like, you know, after, you know, in objectivism, it's like, you know, all the socialist policies and all the socialists go away, we have a capitalist utopia. If all, you know, with Nazism, if all the Jews go away, boom, we have a Volkish, you know, Aryan utopia. Or with the communists, if all people who, you know, if all of the bourgeois are gone, boom, we can have a workers' utopia. So it's like, it's all just this focus on utopianism that drives these people to such radical ends, and in the end, you get, you know, the world's most destructive ideologies, and it's oftentimes where you find the most bodies.
Well, he used the same propaganda. He used the same propaganda by the people that were his enemies before, you know, that got him to where he was. He used the same type of propaganda against them, which is kind of one of the ultimate ironies.
So wait, what do you mean by, like, using the same propaganda again? Like, as in what? Like
against, like some of the when he goes on about like the Jews and the bourgeoisie and all that. I'm not accepting that call. I don't even know who that is. He uses the same type of propaganda that they used against Germany in World War I. And he then takes the propaganda and like I said before, he's very perceptive. He saw how all of these things worked. And like I have said multiple times, like, it's not necessarily a Jewish thing. It's a corruption of power thing, because people who are in these vast places of power, they want more power. Like, I can put myself in their shoes. I would want more power. Like, I've got a pretty decent job. I remember all of the steps that I took working my way up, getting promotions and whatnot and raises and stuff. And hey, you know what? Every time I get a raise, I want another raise. That's all I'm thinking about. It's like, when do I get another raise? When do I get another promotion? You know, how do I keep moving up? How do I get more money? How do I better myself? You know, I want more things. Like, not to sound shallow or anything, but like, that's human nature, right?
Well, yeah, it's just
Like,
all,
obviously, I don't want to
about
have
accruing resources.
Yeah, exactly. So he saw how those people were manipulating the systems, like the news outlets and the propaganda pieces and all this other stuff. And basically, he took notes. And now, essentially, what he wants to do is he wants to consolidate all of that stuff for the people, but more or less for himself. You know what I mean?
Okay, so you're saying he started off with as sort of like a populist figure, and then later
I
on,
think he always had the intention in the back of his head that him and his party, you know what I mean, would basically seize the means of production.
And the means of reproduction, I suppose, if you're concerning how they took notes concerning American eugenics. You know, but it was to a higher ideological goal, though. It wasn't just accruing resources, because you saw, even as the war dragged on, they were wasting a huge number of resources just to carry out their genocide. And even when those resources could better be used to supporting the Reich and the war effort, yet they kept doing it like all the way up to the end. You know, there was something other than like a materialist interest in that. There was ideology driving them, most definitely. I don't think.
I think part of the Jewish thing,
especially the Nazi higher ups, I do not think that they were opportunists. I think Mussolini was a hardcore opportunist. I don't think Hitler was. I think he genuinely believed what he said. Most definitely.
I don't know that he believed all of it, though, because he definitely had some opportunistic what's the word? Situations arise. Like the German army was funded by not entirely by Jews or whatever, but there were Jews who were funding, you know, the war machine and all this, and we're helping.
Well, yeah, a lot of the wealth that what ended up being confiscated, and there were
not even confiscated.
I know there were some aspects. A lot of them, some of them were just foreign financiers, so we couldn't do anything about expropriating their wealth. But a lot of the times you were dealing with, you know, there were toxic alliances and stuff like that. It's like, you know, why are Aryans siding with, you know, the Japanese or something like that, you know? And in terms of maintaining the war effort, that made sense. But in terms of many of the other actions within the Nazi Party, and within the German state itself, I'm seeing a lot of things where it's like, this isn't something that opportunists do. This is something that the ideologically possessed do.
Oh, you know? Yeah. For the most part, definitely ideologically driven, like sticking to the notes. You know what I mean? Like,
yep, sticking to scripture. It wasn't just like, you know, some greedy pope going out, you know, on a crusade. It was, you know, going out on a crusade to take all the gold. It was to take all the gold and kill everyone who wasn't beholden to the Pope.
Yeah, take their land.
Make a weird analogy.
Take all of the resources.
Yep. But we got anything else?
Well, obviously from there, they did the push.
Yep, they did the beer hall push. And got pushed in. And Hitler is now in prison, and he wrote the book.
And he wrote the book, yep. And then when he comes back and gains power, and World War II happens, but that's not part of the actual book. So I guess wrapping up on just the book, I remember when I read the book for the first time, like, there was a massive amount of red pills. And I don't want it to sound like there was like red pills regarding the Jewish question, but if you can correlate all of those like tidbits of information, like the things he observed, into just like power and people in positions of power, like I gained a lot of insight just from that. I guess fortunately for me, I was able to read Mein Kampf and learn something from it that wasn't like death to all Jews. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this is something this is something that I hope the alt-right realizes at some point, that it isn't the Jews, it's people in power. You know, this is I hope they learn that soon.
Yeah, which disproportionately are Jews, but if we could just,
it's not because they're Jewish, guys.
If maybe we could just target those Jews that are in power and just leave the nobodies alone, because the nobodies didn't do anything, right?
Yeah, and it's not because they're Jewish that they do this. it's because they're
pieces of shit.
Yeah. It's like, it has nothing to do with race. It has to do with them being corrupt as all hell.
And people, actually, somebody brought this up to me in a discussion I was talking about the other day, which actually Hitler brought up in Mein Kampf, is the what's it called? The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which I've also read.
Planning on reading that at some point.
Yeah, it's got a bit of controversy behind it, of whether or not, the thing is like, oh, it's a forgery, goyim. And I don't know if I believe that personally. It's really hard to pin down like an actual, like factually where it came from or who wrote it or whatever. There's been lots of like reprints and stuff like that. But the way I see it, I read it, and this was I think like the first open circulation of this was like 1905 or something like that, like really, really early 1900s.
Well, yeah, it was the beginning of the Zionist movement. Yeah.
And the things that are in that book and the things that they say in that book, like you can correlate all that stuff to today, and it's like scary. Almost. Let's just fucking be honest. It's pretty fucking frightening, actually. Basically, what the book is, and I'd actually like to it's not that long of a book. I'd like to actually read it over a stream or something like that at some point. Maybe when I get to a certain amount of subs or some shit. You can find it online too if you want to read it yourself, or I'm sure there's audiobooks out there. Essentially, it's not really just necessarily like a book. It's kind of like,
it's a pamphlet,
a guideline. That's not even a pamphlet. It's like guidelines. Like this is what we need to do. And it was written by Jews, Zionists and whatever.
Yeah,
but it wasn't written by
part of the Zionist movement.
Yeah, it wasn't written by like that guy down the street who lives in a fucking like 1-bedroom apartment. You know what I mean? That costs way too much money and shit.
Yeah, it was written by people who were part of a mass political movement that came about due to an upsurging of anti-Semitism at the end of the 19th century.
And it's just a set of guidelines to like, we have this now, and we're going to take advantage of every single situation that is X, Y, and Z, and we'll keep consolidating power until we get this, and then this will happen, and then we'll do this, and this is how we'll bring nations down, and then we'll do whatever. When I read or when I read the protocols, I didn't read them as they were being written by people who were Jewish. I read them as being written by, I don't want to say Illuminati, because that sounds like really conspiratorial, but in a sense, I mean, oh man, you should read them before you make the globalism joke, because holy shit.
Well, no, I'm
fucking,
I'm sure
it's creepy, dude. I read it under the impression that it was written by, and this is just the case. They just all happen to be Jewish, but it's basically a small handful of a number of like families who have power and resources at the time. You know what I mean? And this is their plan to get more power and resources. And if you can read it outside of like, I feel like reading it will give you a purple pill. You know what I mean? You'll be purple pilled if you read it and you're like, oh, you're still one of those guys who's like, oh, my Jews. If you read
Yeah,
it and you truly get red pilled, that's when you're like, no, this is a small group of fucking individuals who take out race and ethnicity. This is just people with fucking power who have figured out how to maintain and gain more power over the next few generations. And they have the tenacity to do so because they've seen it all in action based on like their experiences and stuff like that. And they're just smart enough to know how to play the fucking system. And you just got to read it. It's fucking creepy, man.
All right, I'll give it a shot.
It's not that it's not that long.
Also, here's another thing. If you want to know the whole like the relation to like the 19th century quote Jewish question unquote, you should totally read Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism. It's sort of it's a semi-historical narrative that goes over late 19th century and early 20th century developments in how Jews were perceived in society, and how the Zionist movement went and affected all of this stuff, and like it pretty much goes from like Benjamin Disraeli, the Jewish prime minister of the I believe the Conservative Party, who the guy who wouldn't shut up about being Jewish. He sort of used that to form a kind of socialite identity around it, like a sort of mystic veneer. It's just
leftist virtue signaling. That has nothing to do with even being Jewish.
Yeah. Well, no,
blacks do it. Females do the same thing. Like I'm just clarifying before someone out there goes like, the triple parentheses and shit.
No, it's not even something like that. But Hannah Arendt herself was Jewish, so she approached the whole origins of totalitarianism through the lens of how Jews were treated up to that point, and up to the point where racial ideology started to develop towards an anti-Semitic end. And Benjamin Disraeli pretty much went, and he was the guy who created the popular image of Jews in the mass media of the time, where he pretty much
Jewish tricks.
Yeah, more or less, because he tried to take and sort of mystify himself to make himself to make the whole Jewish thing. He tried to make himself a novelty, kind of, to make him it's like, oh, look at me, it's like I'm so interesting because I'm the only Jewish guy in British politics, and he sort of formed this veneer and this sort of cape around himself to help him accrue political power by simply being like, look, I'm member of Group A, bet you've never seen that before. Look at me, I'm interesting. And he did it to get attention. And then later on, he used it to accrue political power. And Hannah Arendt goes and looks through the entirety of this stuff. And it's a flawed narrative now, because it's like it was written a really long time ago. She wrote it during the 1950s, before all the current stuff is known. But I would suggest you give it a read if you want to see the relation of Jewish identity towards the development of totalitarianism and the eventual crescendo that was the Holocaust. It's a very interesting read. I didn't enjoy reading it at the time because I wanted to find something that's like, okay, how did fascist Italy develop? How did totalitarianism as a movement develop in a political concept? And so I went and was like, oh, there's a book called The Origins of Totalitarianism. I think I'll choose that. And then it's nothing but Jews. Which I know there's only maybe an eighth of the reason. But
like we've said several times, it's easy to be the person to blame when you're the person that's fucking all the shit up.
More or less, especially if you're part of a group that's generally been marginalized for the past 2,000 years, like pretty much everywhere. It's pretty easy to do. But it's like, by all means, like, give that book a read, because if you like that stuff and you like seeing how the treatment of Jews during that era led up to the Holocaust and all that stuff, fucking read that shit, man. It's right up your alley. That and I suppose there are a couple other things to be read. Some of the books that that Goebbels wrote before he became a propagandist might be something you want to read too, to see how the best propagandist of all propagandists got started. But also one of these days, I'm gonna go and pick it apart because I that video, the Jewish question with Love, Life, and Anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I mentioned before. We need to do that next time because that I liked his videos before. I really did, and so now I just sort of want to. I don't know. I sort of want to pick it apart a little bit. It's like a freaking feature-length film about the Jewish question in 2017. What the living fuck? But especially the end, because it's something that I've seen a lot in ANCAP circles, where there's sort of become a toxic alliance between them and the authoritarian right that I find a little discomforting.
They're just being used as useful idiots.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, which ones are the ANCAPs using them, or are the ANCAPs being used?
Well, the ANCAPs aren't using anybody. That would violate the NAP.
But I gotta watch that. Then we can. I'll even take down like just the exact number, like on the video, and we can just go through it. We'll have to follow the 20-second rule in order to review it, but if you and a couple other guys want to do that, we can just pick apart the entire video if you want. It's almost 3 hours long though, so it's gonna take a while.
That'd be like 3 or 4 streams.
Yeah, more or less. We could divide it up into parts if you guys felt like it.
We'll make a night of it.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Okay, so before we get out of here, what I'm interested. What's the biggest red pill you took away from Mein Kampf?
From Mein Kampf, I think the ominous parallels that we have between the times that Hitler was living in and the times that we are currently living in, and how and I can see why the right wing, especially the far right, is sort of growing now, because it's growing for a lot of the same reasons why it grew so much back then. Especially since the left's credibility has been effectively castrated over the past 10 years or so. So my biggest red pill, I didn't take it from the book in particular. I did take it in terms of, well, he sees like just take a couple words and replace a couple of them as like, replace, world Jewry with globalism, and you'll pretty much get your average right winger.
Mm-hmm.
Your average far righter. Remove that and maybe the state, and you get an ANCAP. So it's like a lot of the stuff we're addressing now is just by different words, and thankfully most of us aren't racist psychopaths. But that's my biggest takeaway from the book is like read that, pay attention, look at the modern day, and then think is what I'm thinking right now right, and does it lead to something better, or should I check my premises? Because that's the biggest thing that I took away from it. It made me examine my own politics and to whether I was still clinging to some ideology somewhere. That's what I took away from it. What did you take from it?
Man, there's so many.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many. My only issue, there's so much. Oh my God, there's so many. The only issue that I have with it is that it's all like everything that is like, I guess we could say like objectively a hard truth is still tainted
by racial ideology.
By racial ideology, yes, exactly. But if you take that out of like the statements or whatever, there
are grains of truth.
It's a lot from this book. Like,
yeah, it's a layman's truth.
Mm-hmm.
If you take away like it'll be what it's like. You go and talk to a member of the American working class right now, and it's like remove all the racial ideology and stuff like that. It's like it's the screamings and mutterings of of a person
Globalism,
suffering
yeah.
during a recession in a post-war era.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just your average bloke
With this, yep, suffering of like austerity-esque measures, and
yeah. So it's like it the fact that I'm gonna discuss this with my teacher because like some of my teachers are still absolutely fascinated. He's like, how did this come about? It's like it's so easy to see how fucking easily these kinds of people are made.
mm-hmm.
You know,
And it's easy
and,
to see how history repeats itself.
yeah.
And not only Mein Kampf, like I remember when I read Mein Kampf, like, and I was young. I was like super young, so I wasn't like a history buff or anything like that. You know what I mean? At the time, like the amount of stuff I did read, like a lot of it didn't click in my head. You know, some of it did, some of it didn't, and stuff like that. But I can correlate this to like previous things that happened to history, like previous uprisings and stuff like that. I can even liken this to like the Bolshevik Revolution. You know what I mean? A lot of this. Essentially what it is it's people versus a corrupt power structure.
Yep.
A corrupt power structure that is so fucking blatantly in your face, like that it gets called out. And then it's so blatant that even people who are like behind, I don't want to say behind the veil because that's the people in power. The people who are being like, who are blind to most things when it's like, when the corruption and control is subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Like it gets to a point, it's inevitable that the people in power, like I said, once you're in power, it's very likely that you're going to be corrupt.
Mm-hmm.
But there's levels of corruption. You know, there's like subtle corruption where you're just looking out for yourself more or less. And then like you get comfortable with that. And then it gets worse and worse and worse. Yes, exactly. You feel like you can take more, and you can take more, and you can take more. And it gets to a certain point where the people that are in power, like, I don't know, I guess lose their grasp on what they can actually get away with and not get caught. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And at that point, that's when you have said revolution. And we've seen this all throughout history. And like I've said, I think we're not exactly like the situation pre-World War II or whatever, but I think we're in another one of those situations. And we'll be in another one of these situations couple hundred years from now. Like it's just, it's, I don't know, it's an inevitable ebb and flow of things.
Yep.
That's the biggest red pill I took out of this.
Yep. It's just another example of that cycle, that vicious political cycle.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It's basically just a cycle of control and freedom.
Yep. That's interesting. I think I have something to talk to Gabriel about next time when when we finally get about to that philosophical shit posting stream. Be able to talk about the cycle of freedom and control. I've never thought about it through that lens. I'll give it some thought. But all right, anything else, or should we get you off to bed?
I drink like 6 cups of coffee during that, my dude.
Oh, Jesus Christ, man, that's unhealthy. Dear God, I don't even bring myself to drink coffee. Ugh.
Why? Coffee is amazing.
Trying to coffee guy. I'm more of a soda guy.
We're comparing post-World War I Germany to modern America. Who would Antifa be analogous to?
Oh, the Social Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
The Social Democrats, the Socialists, the Communists. I'd say as an ideology, they're the ones that have changed the least. I think, although
a lot of people actually.
Mm.
People like Antifa are just useful idiots to people in power who want to have like a look over there type of thing. I feel like that's all that is.
Yeah.
It's classic misdirection, I guess. Is that a proper way of putting it?
Soros.
Yeah. Hashtag not all Soroses.
Oh gosh.
I'm meaning fuck Soros. He's a piece of shit. God damn.
Oh.
If you hear interviews with that guy, oh my god, he can just
kill yourself.
Well, he's on his way out, but he's still got his son and stuff. But
I just hope his heir is really incompetent. I hope it goes the way of the standard capitalist cycle of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
Mm-hmm.
But something which only a handful of capitalist families have been able to survive.
There's always going to be people who have things, and those people who have things are going to want more things because they're human beings, and it's just basic human fucking nature.
Yep.
So that's where the idea of like Illuminati and the Freemasons come in, like secret families that want to get together and not necessarily consolidate their power, but get along for the sake of like moving along. You know what I mean? Like, hey, you don't fuck with us and we won't fuck with you, but we'll all fuck with the little guys.
Yeah.
And those people end up gaining so much power, and then some other people come along and they'll take advantage of like if for example, like in the United States, like when radio was coming about, and this was primarily Jewish families, they were gobbling up radio stations. Or first they like print media wasn't really necessarily owned per se by and large by Jewish families, but then those print media would start to fail, and Jewish families would come along and they'd invest in and buy out and all that stuff, and they'd take control of it because obviously that's a very profitable like industry, right?
Yep.
So then they would take it and they'd use it, and these are people that owned other forms of industries too. So now they just have like a mouthpiece to further push like the goals of their other places of industry. And then it moved on to TV and it moved on to film too.
Yep.
So essentially all it is it's like just a bunch of families who maintain power, and they want to maintain their power. So they move on to the next thing and they gobble that up and add that to their assets. And eventually those people will either get too fucking big for their britches, and they'll blow the fucking load on everybody, and everyone will be like, well, enough is enough, and they'll rise up and they'll fight and they'll push them out and they'll take control, and then it'll be another family that gains all those resources.
Yep.
And so on and so on and so on. It's just fucking nature of things, really.
Yep. It's like human recession. Everything goes wrong, people die, and then it's all just a means of social self-correction for people to get things back on track and bring everything back to health.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm not saying that the Holocaust was a necessary purge, you guys, but it's an example of this sort of process that happens.
Well, actually, one could easily argue that the Holocaust was more than beneficial to those who were in those positions of power, because ultimately they got their state of Israel and whatnot.
Well, yeah, and you can keep using the Jewish card like the better part of a century later.
Yeah, and that's another reason why I try to stay away from like the all Jews are evil type of thing, because the people who are in power don't give a fuck about the little guy, regardless of whether he's the same faith or same ethnicity or nationality or whatever. They don't care.
Yeah, especially since most of them don't even give a damn about their faith. It's just the identity.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It's like they'll use and abuse you just like they'll use and abuse everybody else.
Yep.
And maybe even more so, because at that point, then they could be like, oh, the Holocaust.
Yeah. So and then using the Holocaust as a justification for Israeli imperialism or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But anyway, I have to make myself some dinner, and you need to at least try to get some sleep, because seriously, that's 28 hours. That's unhealthy.
Fuck that shit. I'm about to go play Friday the 13th, my dude.
Oh my god.
Give us an outro and we'll get out of here.
All right. Well, this was the Mockery of Voltaire and Porpoiseful Discussions, talking about Mein Kampf. Read it. It's interesting. It's like the window into the mind of a man who became a maniac.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. Yep. I'm out.
Peace.